Hey, y'all, welcome back to Right at the Wire. Well, we've reached part 4 of our Elements of Handicapping series, Pace, where we take a look at how the others have run in their prior races and how it's going to stack up in the Belmont Stakes. So let's take a look at the contenders. Part 4 is Pace. A look at the pace fractions for each contender in the Belmont Preps to evaluate if they can get the distance and factor in the Belmont Stakes. And very quickly for the uninitiated, I'll give you an idea of what these fractions mean, or what these numbers mean. 1FR, 2FR, and 3FR are the first, second, and third pace calls for the races listed. EP is early pace. That's the second call of any route race. AP is the average pace. It's taking the EP, early pace, and SP, sustained pace, adding them together, divide by 2. That's the average pace. That's the average number of horses running throughout the race. Sustained pace is taking the early pace and the third fraction, adding them together and dividing by 2, and that gives you the number of how the horse is carrying their pace across the race. So hopefully that'll make sense to you. If we look at Tapit's shoes, we'll see that the first fraction was a 55.99, second fraction was a 52.57, and the third was a 51.06. So that's a logical pace pattern for a horse who was running up near the lead. Usually, it's not the horse who's running the fastest who wins a race. It's the one who decelerates the slowest. So we always have to remember that. So a lot of times it looks like they're going a lot faster when really they're not. They're actually slowing down, but at a lesser rate than the horses behind them. So we see from that a 51.06 won't cut it for the Belmont. Generally, you want to see a third fraction of 53 or higher. And incidentally, those numbers are feet per second that the horse is traveling. So at 53 feet per second, you're looking at roughly around a final fraction of about like 24 seconds for a quarter mile, to give you an indication. So based upon those pace parameters, and incidentally, the AP and the SP, the average pace and sustained pace, when you have a race and any horse has the best of both AP and SP, they generally win the race. So something to keep in mind here. We've projected out those pace numbers from the Bathhouse Road to 1.5 miles to see what it might look like. And you'll see it's kind of logical, 47 and 112 and 1. And those are numbers for a horse, honest pace for a horse who's rating off the pace. But then you see that final time of 229.8, and that's pretty slow. Generally, a Belmont par time, if you will, something between 225 and 226 would be considered a really good time. Generally, it's between 226 and 228. I believe it would justify won the Triple Crown. I think it was 228 and change. So that gives you a frame of reference of how what the pace numbers look like for the Belmont par-wise. So Tapit Trice is now. I've done something a little different here. Obviously, the Kentucky Derby, I think, was an anomaly. I mean, it was a very disappointing race, but there was something from the pace study that I thought you guys might be interested in. Generally, when horses don't like a track, they tend to speed up in the middle of the race because they get frustrated, and obviously then they fall back. And I'm just wondering if maybe that's what happened with Tapit Trice here. Because as I noted previously, I don't think Tapits like Churchill Downs. They just don't. And I've seen a lot of them be disappointing in the Derby for that reason. So if we look at those Kentucky Derby numbers, we see 54.12. That's back towards the back of the pack. And then we see in the second call, he made a big move. And the 56.58 is a pretty strong move in the middle of a race. And consequently, his third fraction was a 51.5. So it ate him up pretty much. But I think we can explain that if he didn't like the track. And I think that's a very plausible explanation. So if we look at the Bluegrass Stakes, I think that's probably a more realistic pace line. And you see he's fairly one pace, 54, 54, 53. Obviously, any horse that can carry their speed on a longer distance and maintain a 53 final fraction, they're going to be awfully competitive in the Belmont, and that's what we have with Tapit Trice. So if we prorate that out, Well, I gave you 2 times. The first time is his Kentucky Derby pace, and we see 48, 112, which is, pace towards the back of the pack with a 229 flat finish, which wouldn't be good enough. But if we prorated out the Bluegrass Stakes, we get 48, 112, roughly about the same, and then with a finish of 227.1, which is still pretty good. It's not, I'll just tell you, it's not the fastest prorated time in here, but it is a solid one. And I think the 1.5 miles being more suitable to Tapit Trice, it's likely he will run better than that. So he gets a C+ pace grade just because of the Derby being what it was. And we have to be fair, but certainly there's room for improvement. And I think Tapit Trice is going to run a big race. I think the Belmont's very well suited for him. Number 3 is Arcangelo, and we look at the Peter Pan. We always remember, of course, that was a one-turn race, but if we look at the fractions, it's rather interesting. You see, he was actually running faster as the race was going onward. 53, 54, 54, 7-3. At a 1.8 miles, that's pretty good pace numbers. If he could run that in the Belmont, he will win the race. No doubt about it. You heard it here first. If he runs back to that, but I don't think he's going to, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, that was a one-turn race. This is going to be a 2-turn race. It's a 1.8 miles. This is a 1.5 miles. Big difference. Second thing is he ran a very big number in that race, as we talked about in our speed analysis. And consequently, I think he's pretty much due for a regression. And I'm not thinking he's going to be able to run back to that. But if we do project it out for a 1.5 miles, you would see that he runs 49 and 113. Those are, very pedestrian numbers, which he was mid-pack or towards the rear, and then finishing with a 226 and 3. And that would be a very competitive Belmont winning time. I don't think he will run back to that. But for those of you who are fans of Arcangelo, I think that should give you a pretty good idea. If you believe that he's going to move forward, that's what he'll probably run. And I just don't think it's going to happen. So he gets a B+, mainly because it's not an A, because it was a one-turn race we based this on. But I think he ran, obviously a really good race. And if he runs back to that pace-wise, he would win the Belmont. If you believe that, then you should be excited. But I don't think it's going to happen. Number 4 is National Treasure. We all know what he did in the Preakness, slowed the pace down. So, and that's indicative if you look at his last 3 races. You see in the Sham, he was up near the lead and ran at 57 and 3, 54, 50, 34. Those are numbers that are indicative of a horse running up near the front end for a mile or a mile and a 16th race. And, again, decelerating, especially when you're carrying the pace early. But we see in the Santa Anita Derby, he stayed a little further back, and consequently the first fraction decreased. So 56, 53, but the last fraction increased to a 52.67, which isn't bad. And if he had gone into the Derby, I would say that with a move forward that he likely would be okay for the Derby. But we look at the Preakness and we see once again, he slowed the pace down on the front end. And look what happened, 53.96, 53.72, and a 54.19. Had plenty in the tank left to finish off Blazing Sevens. Now, if he runs back to a 54.19 in the Belmont, he's going to win the race because that's an outstanding last fraction. Granted, it was predicated on a slow pace, but there isn't a lot of pace pressure expected on him for this race. Could he run back and do this at a 1.5 miles? I think he could. I just don't know if he's going to be able to. There's a lot of other heavy hitters in this race, but it is something you want to think about, and I don't think it's out of the question because he's going pretty well right now, and based upon our speed analysis, I think he's got another move forward in him. Gets a B because, again, that's an ideal situation. The Preakness was, and I'm not sure it'll be replicated here. But if you do look at the prorated 1.5 miles time, you see 48 and 4, 113 and 2, and a 226 and 2 final time, which would be very competitive and would be potentially a winning number for the Belmont. So I think, National Treasure is one you got to think about. Il Miracolo, that I don't know why it says Peter Pan there. I apologize for that. It's meant to say optional claimer for 100,000 at Gulfstream. 1 turn mile. That's Il Miracolo's last race. And you can see those pace numbers are indicative of a horse running a 1 turn mile on the front end. 58, 52, 49. Not going to cut it for a 2-turn race at 1.5 miles. And the only thing I will take away from this is that he could be sent to the front by his connections. I heard the owner said he likes to gamble. What have they got to lose? They might just send him on the front end and see how far he can go. And that would certainly make things better for a few of the contenders in here. Not so good for National Treasure. But anyway, so we look at those numbers, and based upon the pace parameters and based upon a 1-turn mile and being hot on the early end, you come up with an average and sustained pace numbers that are pretty good. But again, it's not based on a 2-turn race. That's indicative of the way we project out the 1.5 mile time. If we take those 3 fractions, he ends up with a 2:30 and 2. That is not a winning Belmont time, and it'll probably put him in dead last. So pace-wise, he gets a C minus. It's not going to happen. That's the bottom line to it. I can't express that enough. So now we look at Forte, and unfortunately all we have is the Florida Derby Fountain Youth and Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Those are his last 3 races. Now, it has been a while since he raced last time, but one thing we know from these 3 is look at those numbers. He's like a drum, runs the same race every single time, consistent as hell. And in fact, the Florida Derby was really exciting to me because look at that final fraction. It actually increased. And that's when he had to raise his game to take Mage out. He's consistent as hell. You could almost tell time by him. If he runs back to those numbers for the Belmont at 1.5 miles, he's a winning candidate without question. And that's why his AP and his SP, if you take out Il Miracolo, he leads this field because he's just so consistent, and that final fraction is outstanding. So if we prorate out that 1.5 mile time, what do you get? You get 48 and 111. He's about a mid-pack horse, and that's right for that. And you final time you get is 225 and 1-1. If he runs to that number, he's going to win this race, and he's going to win it pretty handily. Gets a B-plus pace grade-wise because he hasn't run the classic distance yet, and this is based upon 10 weeks ago. So that's why it's a B-plus. Otherwise, for the Derby, he had an A rating to give you an idea. So Forte, he fires fresh off the bench, got a lot of class. I think he's an obvious win candidate, and I think his pace numbers bear that out. Hit show, the more you watch that Kentucky Derby, the more you have to be impressed with it. He ran a really nice race, staying up around that hot pace and still hanging on at the finish. And that's indicated by his pace numbers. You see 56.86, 54.03. For the Kentucky Derby for 1.25 miles, that's pretty fast. And he was right behind the leaders the whole way. He obviously suffered for it because his final fraction, 50.91, in order to stay up there, it took a lot of energy. Now, the couple things that do bother me about the Derby, I thought he ran a nice race, but he had every chance to take control of the race, and he didn't do it. And he just couldn't. 2 Phils did, but he couldn't do it, and he was right there too. And I think that's indicated by that 50.91 final fraction, which won't cut it for the Belmont. Now, that was based upon a hot pace. We're not expecting the pace to be terribly hot for the Belmont unless Il Miracolo goes wild. So the Wood Memorial might be a little bit better indicator of how he can run, and you'll see. 53.22, 55.93, a little bit of a middle move to get into position, and then close with a 52.10, which isn't bad, but it's not quite winning the Belmont. So we project out the times. Now, granted, it's based upon the Derby and a hot pace. You get 46 and 2, 110 and 4, 228 and 3. Justify won the Triple Crown with a race about that level. Is it possible that that time could win it? Sure. Is it likely? I don't think so. I just think Kit shows a cut below. Pace grade, he gets a C plus because I think under a more moderate pace, I think he'd probably run something like the Wood Memorial, which would be would put him right in the mix somewhere, but not winning. Number 8 is Angel of Empire, and we have his last 3 races. And, the thing about Angel of Empire that I continue to stress is he just keeps getting better as the distances keep getting longer. So the Belmont, I think, is ideal for this horse. And one of the really encouraging things, if you look at his pace numbers, you'll see that the first and second fractions in the Arkansas Derby and Risen Star don't really change a lot, but the third fraction does. It gets better. And that tells you that the horse is carrying his speed longer. So he's definitely on the improve. Now, if we look at the Kentucky Derby, obviously a mile and a quarter, we'll see that he stayed towards the rear with a 54.56 and then made a middle move to get into contention, a 56.22. So it just means he picked it up a little bit, and consequently, he didn't get a closing fraction over 53, but it was a nice one at 52.81, and obviously ran a really good third and had a really nice gallop out. So I think those numbers tell you that this horse can definitely be competitive in the Belmont. And if we prorate out that time, you see 48.38, 111.4, and 4, which is about what we expected to be, which is either towards the rear or maybe mid-pack, and then closing it out with a 226 and 4, which is a competitive time. I think he's demonstrated, particularly with the Derby, that he can run at this pace level for the Belmont. And the only question you do have and why he gets an A- instead of an A is because if they do slow it down successfully on the front end, that may compromise his chances late. However, they are putting blinkers on him this time, which is kind of interesting. He trains in blinkers all the time, but he doesn't race with them. So I just think maybe they're going to try to get him a little closer this time. I'm not sure. But any event, regardless of how he runs the race, I think he's a definite win candidate based upon his prior efforts. So now we come to Red Route 1, and the ubiquitous Red Route 1. It seems like he's in every race. He's got some interesting pace numbers to consider. If you look at the Arkansas Derby where he kind of flattened out, you see a 52.67, and you see a middle move in the second fraction of 56.95, where they tried to get him going a little earlier, and he flattened out a little bit, and consequently, I think he was 6th. But in the Bathhouse Row, he was a little more one-paced, and you see that the fractions really didn't change a whole lot from one to the other. And the horse that reminds me of who did that as well is Wet Paint. And Wet Paint was at Oklahoma, look at that big closing kick. Wasn't so. If some of you who watched the elements of handicapping for the Oaks we did, you would note that she really, more than anything, Wet Paint was one-paced, so was able to maintain her speed longer when it looked like when the others were slowing down. So it looked like she was running a big kick. So that was a winning effort in the Bathhouse Row. We fast forward to the Preakness, and we see pretty much did the same thing, but got particularly in the second fraction, started to make a move up, and I really thought he was going to take over the race at that point, and then just sort of didn't. But the interesting thing is, you look at that final fraction, 54.9. If he runs that in the Belmont, he's going to win this by open lengths. I'll tell you that right now. But I don't think it's going to happen. He's ran that way and still, even with accelerating fractions, which is not usual at all. Secretariat's the only other horse I know who did that in the Kentucky Derby. Not comparing the two. But you see, even running that way, he ended up 4th. And so it didn't get the win. So maybe what they do is go back to this horse's preferred style, which is coming from the clouds, and make one big run at it and see if it holds water. If you project out the mile and a half time based upon the Preakness, you see 49, 113, and 4, and 226.12, which is a very competitive time, and it could conceivably win the race. Based upon our speed analysis, we think Red Route 1 is going to move forward, but likely it's going to be a cut below the best in here. So I think he's definitely an exotics player, and that's why he gets a B minus. Mainly because if he does go back to that one-run closing style, I don't know how much pace he's going to have to run to, and I think it would kind of compromise his chances. Nonetheless, I still think he's a little bit of he's a cut below, and exotics are the best possible scenario for him. So if we put all the pace comparison together, the Tapit shoes, or Tapit Trice rather, that's based upon the Kentucky Derby. Obviously, he'll do better than that. So you don't have to consider that one, take that one quite so seriously. But if you look at the rest of them, you see the average pace and sustained pace. If you throw out Miracolo, because that was based upon a one-turn mile, then Forte leads in both categories. And again, that's beclouded because it was based upon the Florida Derby, which was run 10 weeks ago. Generally, the horses who are staying in these ranges, in the 53 range, are looking good. They're going to not have a problem with the Belmont. And I'll throw Tapit Trice in there as well, based upon his bluegrass. So the ones really to toss that I just don't think are going to make it are Il Miracolo and Tapit shoes. And I know it's unpopular, but Arcangelo, I don't think is going to make it either. If you look, you see that Forte has the fastest pro-rated mile and a half time at 2:25 and 1, or 0.11. And then we have National Treasure, Arcangelo, and Angel of Empire and Red Route 1. Those are our top 5. Again, I think the Arcangelo's is a little bit clouded for the reasons I stated, but I think that we've got the horses we thought are going to be players are. That's the bottom line to it, more than anything else. And I'm not sure any of the 3 new shooters really are going to factor in this race, and that's what I saw from the pace study. And I hope that was, I hope that makes sense to you. So we're done with pace, and we have to remember that's only one aspect of handicapping a race. So we do have form, class, and speed, as we've already covered. We're going to put them all together, and that will give us the final assessment of each of the contenders' chances for the Belmont Stakes. We'll have that for you very shortly. Also going to have a sequence for Saturday, the Pick 5 All Stakes, and it looks like a really good one. It's a really terrific card on Saturday, and I hope you're as excited as I am to take a look at it. Of course, if you do like what you see here, please like and subscribe, and we thank you for coming by. Hopefully this has been helpful for you so far, and that you're getting some good information that'll help you formulate your picks. And again, we'll have more for you and wrap it all up very soon. So be on the lookout for that. I'll talk to you in the very near future. And until then, be well.